Since childhood, he had heard strange voices, which begged him to do this. They asked him to save this world. After all, he was a hero and only he could do it. They were drawn to him, the souls of dead warriors who had failed to do it. At that moment, he was very scared. He cried and wanted to see his mother. He did not understand why the spirit said that he was the chosen one. Why him, and not someone else should do it? He was scared, but his mother calmed him down. He was the last hope of this world for survival. Therefore, he simply had no other choice. It was his true calling. He could not be weak and give up. He had to die and do it like a true hero. A drop of water fell on his face. A heavy downpour began, which brought him to his senses. The hero lay in the middle of a destroyed city, where life had once raged. In his hands was a sword, his only weapon. He just wanted to rest a little, but he simply didn't have time for that, because he was surrounded on all sides by monsters, whom he was trying to stop. They were the ones who didn't give him time to rest. There were a lot of them, and they all appeared out of nowhere. Among the monsters, there were many strong monsters with a high level of magic, but this did not scare him at all. Therefore, he again rushed into mortal combat. Their eyes burned, they tried and wanted to kill him. The last hero who held on and was the only one who could stop them. For his bravery, he received this title. He was a hero. Fierce battles made him strong and resilient. Killing mutants, he constantly pumped up his rank. An entire army stood in his way. However, with a strong blow, he managed to kill the first wave that surrounded him. After a few hours, the battle was over. He remained alive again and was able to win. But he knew that this was not the end. After all, real evil from hell itself appeared right in front of him. No one had ever managed to defeat him before. A demon with the head of a bull who came from another world to kill. It was Fafnir, a monster that no one had defeated. The hero wanted to defeat him and take away the power that he had. The battle began. From the first blow, he could not dodge. Due to severe wounds, he was on the ground and began to bleed. Was this really the end? At that moment, he really thought that he would die. After all, the mutants began to surround him again. There were so many of them that it seemed that nothing could stop them. At that moment, he gave up. The hero could no longer protect anyone. The demon was going to deliver the final blow and kill him, and the voice in his head only grew louder. Suddenly, he began to open his eyes and come to his senses. The sunlight began to shine directly into his face. He opened his eyes. In front of him were his friends who were trying to shout to him. Now, he realized that he was in the ordinary world and all his friends were alive and well. He suddenly lost consciousness, so they were scared for him and thought that he had already died. Suddenly, Kim Soo-hyun stood up and scared them even more. After all, at that moment, he behaved like a real ghost, and his behavior was unpredictable. Kim Soo-hyun looked at his hands. There were no wounds on his body, and it was an ordinary, sunny day outside. The boys looked at him in surprise. They even thought he had gone mad. Was it really just a dream and all the monsters he had fought were just a vision? Suddenly, the man grabbed his clothes. After all, if he woke up, it meant that he could continue to be beaten. And at that moment, he was going to hit him. Suddenly, Kim Soo-hyun stopped him and didn't let him do it. He didn't expect that he would be able to do it, and the enemy was even surprised. Kim Soo-hyun was no longer going to tolerate the bullying that had happened to him at school. And now, for the first time in his life, he was going to fight back and defend himself. From a strong blow, the guy flew away from him and ended up on the ground. The others just watched and were shocked by what happened. None of them dared to hit him anymore. And on the face of his abuser, there was a big bruise from the blow. Suddenly, the guys heard that the police were nearby. Therefore, they simply decided to run away to avoid the troubles that awaited them. The main character got up and could not understand what really happened to him. On the ground, there was a phone that had fallen out when he was beaten. His body hurt, and he did not remember how he got here. The phone belonged to one of the abusers, and it was quite good. But when he looked into the reflection, he almost fainted again. After all, there he saw a guy who was completely unfamiliar to him. In the year 2042, the world came to an end. Mysterious dungeons began to appear all over the world, from which terrible mutants emerged to the surface. And this destroyed the world of people forever. But there were people who tried to do everything possible to stop this. All over the world, such people began to be called awakened, and the main character was one of them. Even after all the people died, he was the last one left and continued to fight. It was he who became the last representative of humanity and the awakened. Suddenly, he found himself in the police, where a man asked his name. The boy went there after what happened to him. The man continued to question him. However, he did not answer. Kim Soo-hyun noticed that it was now 2022. However, he thought that in reality, it should have been 2042. Had time really changed by 20 years? Therefore, if he looked like a student now, he decided to say that he was 12. He did not know anything else and simply remained silent to all the man's questions. He continued to think about the vision he had seen and about dying. The boy tried to remember those feelings before dying. And he realized that everything that had happened to him was real. Therefore, Had he really returned to the past? But what did he need to do to return to his real body now? Meanwhile, the officer realized that there was no point in talking to him, so he decided to let him go and warned him not to appear near the construction sites because it appeared exactly there. Meanwhile, his mother arrived at the station. The woman rushed to him and began to examine him carefully, so she was scared for him. It seemed that something was wrong with him, and he was not the same as usual. However, looking at her, the guy could not understand who was in front of him. Together with her, he decided to return to the house where the main character lived. However, he still couldn't remember anything, and this address was unfamiliar to him. In addition, it seemed to her that he spoke very strangely and was not the same as usual. However, he couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, and he didn't listen to what she was telling him at all. The woman began to wipe his face with a napkin. She had heard that the children had tried to beat him again, and this continued regularly. Her son was a loser who was constantly bullied. She took his hand and promised that she would do everything possible to ensure that this would not happen again. In front of him, he saw an empty area. There was absolutely no one there except them. Had something really happened there? Kim Soo-hyun thought about the place they were in now. Suddenly, he felt that danger was approaching them. They were hungry dogs with big teeth, real monsters. This vision was sudden, and he stopped. However, it did not give him peace, and he felt something quickly begin to approach them. And suddenly, he turned around and saw a creature that was about to attack him. The dog with red eyes opened its mouth and was about to bite him. Were they really wolves? But how did they end up here? The guy tried to protect the woman and covered her with his own body. The dog jumped on him, but he managed to push it away. But he was not an ordinary wolf, so he turned around and was going to attack people again. It seemed that he began to understand that he was facing a real werewolf. He remembered the events from the past and realized that the police station, it reminded him of the place where he fought with monsters and died. Now, there were more wolves, and they were going to continue the attack. The guy did not know what to do, but he had to protect himself and the woman who was next to him. He had no weapons under his arms, so he was going to use an ordinary umbrella. The woman could not believe that the monsters were able to reach the city. After all, the news said that they were not so dangerous. Suddenly, the monster started attacking the main character again, but he was able to dodge again. Once below, he struck and wounded the dog. The first monster ended up on the ground and began to bleed. The other one was also not going to retreat, and was going to attack from behind, just when Kim Soo-hyun did not expect it at all. At the last moment, he managed to stop it. However, the creature was much stronger than him, and soon, he would no longer be able to hold it by force. The guy found himself on the ground and realized that he was powerless. Suddenly, another monster appeared, which was going to attack from the other side. Before that, he was completely unprepared, but his mother intervened and saved his life. The boy couldn't believe that this woman could be so brave. From the strong blow, she ended up on the ground. She fell painfully on the ground. However, she was able to stop the werewolf's attack. Kim Soo-hyun couldn't understand why she saved him. Now he decided to act and pushed him away with his foot. While the werewolf was on the ground, he ran up to the woman and helped her up. Her whole body hurt, however. She didn't regret her action at all. She was ready to sacrifice her own life just for him to stay alive. However, he decided that he would not leave her here. Suddenly, he felt that the wolves were going to attack him again. They were behind and were looking at him with hungry eyes. At that moment, he fell into despair because he did not know what to do. However, he knew that he had to save the woman and do everything possible for this. The eyes of the evil monsters shone, but suddenly they simply disappeared. He did not understand what really happened and why they disappeared, but he was already ready for battle and did not want to let them go. But suddenly, he felt that his strength had left him and he lost consciousness. Waking up, he realized that he was very tired, and he realized that he was really very weak and not at all resilient. Having picked up the woman, he was going to take her home. However, he had a new problem. After all, he did not know the address of his own house. Therefore, he had to drive blindly. After some time, he found himself in his house. The tired woman was lying on the bed, and he watched how she felt. He found the address of the house in her wallet, and this allowed him to find the house. So he would have had to look for the house until the very morning. Suddenly, the woman turned to him and promised that she would always be with him. But now, he needed to run away and save his own life. He looked at the woman and didn't understand anything. Why was she willing to sacrifice her own life to save his life? Did she just want to protect him because she was the mother of the boy in whose body he was? Kim Soo-hyun looked at her for a long time before leaving. Kim Soo-hyun didn't understand why the body he was in was so weak, and he thought about how it could be changed. He couldn't create with the fact that he was so weak right now. Suddenly, an incomprehensible portal appeared behind him. He tried to calm himself down and didn't notice what happened behind him. The user confirmation began, and he heard a voice. Suddenly, he realized that he had been confirmed. The gate in front of him opened, and he had to go inside. But he was in no hurry. What awaited him next? This meant that he had a chance to start from the beginning and become stronger. He was afraid, but he could not miss this chance and not take advantage of it. Still, he decided to go inside because he believed that he simply had no other choice. Kim Soo-hyun found himself in the testing tower and saw a message that congratulated him on his beginning. The Tower of Trials was known as the Abyss. As soon as he could clear the first floor, he would gain the right to become awakened. With each floor, the level of difficulty would increase and soon, the trial would begin. Now he had to choose a difficulty level. There were only 10 levels, and he decided to choose the hardest one, the 10th. The stronger the enemies, the greater the reward for them, but the risk of dying was also high. After some time, he found himself on the first floor, and the level of difficulty was chosen as the 10th. Therefore, the appropriate conditions for survival were created. He was not sure that he would be able to survive the trial because he remembered that in his past body he had chosen the 8th level. But he was determined to do it no matter what it cost him. But if he followed the same path, he would meet the same end. Before the test began, he had to choose a weapon for himself. He began to choose, and the monsters that were around him were already ready to attack. He made his choice, and from that moment on, his test began. Several hours passed. Suddenly, the boy who was also a participant in the test began to scream and call for help. The werewolves surrounded him and he could die. The wolves began to approach him, and it seemed that he would die now. He begged to be saved, and he hoped that someone could be next to him and save him. The main character heard that someone nearby needed help, and he realized that these were the very monsters that had almost killed him. Therefore, he decided to intervene in order to take revenge and save the boy. He took out his weapon and was about to strike. He cut the monster into pieces and killed it. The first threat was destroyed. The other wolf did not even dare to attack, but Kim Soo-hyun did not want to let him go. The animal, sensing imminent death, just froze in place, but he was about to strike. In the end, the first floor was cleared because all the mutants were dead. Constantly, the number of open dungeons on the ground only increased. Compared to other years, now there are several times more of them. The Tower of Trials, the system, and the dungeons appeared at about the same time. In them, you could find valuable things that could be used for your own purposes. Therefore, their price was high, and those who passed the trials could become rich. In some places, monsters could choose to surface and end up in the real world. While the dungeons and systems were functioning, a lot of strong mutants got into the real world. People who passed the trials boasted that they were able to upgrade their own ranks. A league table appeared in the city center, and everyone saw that Kim Soo-hyun was in first place and earned a lot of points. No one had heard of this guy before, and everyone wanted to see who the leader of the system really was. Kim Soo-hyun moved to a new level and remembered the area that was already familiar to him in his past life. In his past life, he remembered that the system was a huge world, in which there could be a lot of people who tried to fight and raise their level. But before going up to a new floor, everyone had to pass a test. In order to move to a new level, he had to collect points, so he started killing mutants. He managed to kill all the mutants and earn the maximum number of points. Therefore, his trial test was passed. He believed that if it weren't for the memories from his past life, he would never have been able to cope with the test. He was satisfied, because he understood that at this pace, he would be able to go all the way to the end. He received a whole list of final rewards for passing the level. His characteristics and points grew much faster than he thought. He had a lot of points. Therefore, he thought that he could safely move on to a new level and continue the test. In addition, he could buy some things for himself with the points. Therefore, he went to the store and already made a list for himself of what he needed. A nice woman was waiting for him in the middle who met him. She started talking to him. She realized that it was his first time in the store and he didn't know what was sold there. Veli wanted him to tell her about everything he needed in the store. But in fact, he knew her and had already decided on what he needed a long time ago. He wanted to buy jumping skills and transformation skills. The woman smiled because she thought that he simply wouldn't have enough money for this. However, she didn't even guess that she was not an ordinary beginner. However, he paid the full amount for everything. She couldn't believe that a beginner could get so many points at the very beginning of the test. After all, no one had ever managed to get so many points on the first floor before. But he called himself an ordinary customer who was in her store for the first time. Still, he decided to leave the store after buying what he needed. Now, he was thinking about what to do next. He hadn't spent all the money yet, so he was thinking about what to do with it. He wanted to buy himself new weapons and improve his own equipment. Therefore, he began to analyze to understand what was better. In addition, in order to effectively master the skills, he needed to pump the required level of mana. Such skills were very difficult to obtain because they had a certain level of growth. Therefore, you could use special potions to pump your skills faster. These were special catalysts that could be very effective. They could be bought at a regular store or received as a reward. In addition, they could be found on every floor because they were hidden. These were actually useful items that helped to break away and earn a lot of points and strength at the beginning. He knew this because of memories from his past life, but suddenly someone approached him. An unknown man with red hair wanted to talk to him. Kim Soo-hyun was shocked because he didn't feel that someone was approaching him. Moreover, he had never seen this man and didn't know who he was. But when he looked at him, he seemed to start remembering. And he remembered the events of his past life and this guy, who fought against a large number of monsters alone and was able to win. Could it really be him, the unknown hero that no one knew? His name was Choi Hak-jun, and he was a true genius among all the awakened. But later, it was he who became the culprit of the death of many innocent people, and became the enemy of many guilds, which began to hunt for his head. Now, there was no doubt that it was him in front of him. Seeing him, the main character was very surprised. After all, now he did not look as evil as in the past. The guy admitted that he had been following him since he left the store. He saw that the boy had bought himself a lot of different items and wanted to ask him for advice. And at that moment, he smiled. There was something wrong in his smile. Kim Soo-hyun tensed up because it could be dangerous. Suddenly, he invited him to join his team and be with him. The second test began. He received a treasure with which he had to escape into the forest and protect it from enemies. He was to be threatened by mutants who wanted to take it away. They began to search for the hero in the forest, smelling his scent, and he hiding and sitting high on a tree. Before entering the battle, he tried to study his enemies. He knew that these were monster hunters and they tracked their prey well. It was practically impossible to escape from them, and therefore, the mission was, in fact, very difficult. In addition, he realized that the necklace he received had no effect. But he needed to be protected, so he thought of a plan on how to defeat him. But suddenly, the mutants noticed him. One of them just looked at him. The guy realized that he was no longer safe, so he dared to attack. He descended from the tree and prepared for battle. Before the mutant could react, he struck and cut him in half. After all, surviving only meant that he had to defeat all the mutants that threatened him. One of them was going to attack from behind. However, he killed him and received a whopping 20 experience points. Other deaths also brought him experience points, and gradually, he earned experience and rank. In addition, the mutants moved in groups, which meant that they could easily surround him. In addition, he knew that it was difficult to cope with the monsters on the next levels alone, so he needed allies. Before that, Choi Hak-jun asked if he was going to continue and reach the 8th level. And yes, the main character was going to do it, and he had his own reasons for doing so. And the 8th level was too low for his final goal. He wanted much more. Suddenly, a new monster appeared in front of him, a huge mutant with a rider, who was the boss. Now, he used his strength and jumped up to get it. He was going to defeat it with one blow and was going to hit it with all his strength right in the head. As a result, he managed to kill it and cut its entire body in half. As a result of the victory, he gained a unique ability and could generate his wounds and characteristics. He did not expect the reward to be so unique and underestimated the treasure he received. Because of this, his characteristics grew much faster than in the past. And with the help of transformation, he was able to understand how the boss would behave and where to strike. Also, he used a special clan skill that temporarily relieved fatigue and pain. Although he was tired, he still gained a lot from the battle. And if he continued at this pace, then perhaps in this life he would succeed. Also, he noticed that his fatigue was at a high level. After getting out of the forest, he found himself at home. His mother was waiting for him, so she prepared a delicious meal. He was so hungry that he was ready to eat everything at once, and he couldn't believe his eyes when he saw so much food. She did it for him because he saved her. After all, now she felt much better and thanked her son for saving her life and not leaving her. Kim Soo-hyun was shocked. He still couldn't believe that he was in another guy's body and that this woman was his mother. However, he had no other choice, and he hadn't eaten anything so delicious in a long time. He decided to try. The food was really delicious, and it smelled nice. He thanked the woman, but he was sad that he wouldn't be able to become her real son anymore. It seemed that he was very hungry because he ate without stopping. After completing the 2nd level in the tower, the news came out. He managed to become the leader again, but the people who watched it did not believe it and waited for confirmation. The guy sat on the forum and read what was written about him. They did not believe that a newcomer could so easily break through to the top. In addition, he reminded them of someone because it seemed that they had seen it somewhere before. People expressed their opinions about him, and the main character himself did not believe that he could become so popular even before the end of the test. Kim Soo-hyun could join any guild because he proved that he was a good warrior. Despite his popularity, he understood that his popularity could be a problem. Meanwhile, the events moved to the Ares Guild headquarters. They had already learned that Kim Soo-hyun had returned and was in first place. In addition, Choi Hak-jun had appeared with him at the same time. Choi Hak-jun did not recognize him, but he had the impression that they had met before. But the test was not over yet. Soon, a new test was to begin, the third floor of the tower. He planned to kill him because later he could become much stronger. Therefore now, the main character had become a real problem for him. Now, he was trying to find allies who would go to the tower with him. But in any case, he was ready to go alone. The man promised to find him people if the boy couldn't do it alone. He warned that his main task was to stay alive and move on to a higher level. And what would happen next? Everyone already knew. They agreed to meet in a week, and the man warned him that he should have defeated the main character. But the guy knew that Kim Soo-hyun, in fact, was not so simple. He remembered meeting him and tried to understand where they could have met before. He had guesses about Kim Soo-hyun, who fought monsters in the past, and if it was really him, then killing him could be very difficult. Meanwhile, the test continued and he managed to successfully pass all the levels. In addition, he passed the test and could enter college, and his mother was happy. He was so strong that he could easily clear the 9th penultimate floor. He was about to leave and said goodbye to the woman, and promised that he would return soon. A whole year had passed since the beginning of the test, and the last floor of the tower remained to be completed. From the very beginning, he thought that it could be faster. He was worried, but still managed to clear the floor. Next was the last floor, which could take much more time. After all, this floor was a kind of barrier that had to be overcome. The level of difficulty grew with each level, so no one dared to take a high level of difficulty. But he was not going to give up, because he had gone through a difficult path to this moment. And now, he was going to do everything in order to become stronger. In a year, a green dungeon was to appear, which would become the greatest catastrophe. It would be an event that would change all life and become a threat to all living things. Suddenly, he saw a bright flash in the sky that blinded him. He understood that everything had begun. A new catastrophe had begun again. After a while, he was ready to begin his ordeal and go to the 10th level. On his way, he met a man who knew that he was now heading to the 10th floor. He wanted the boy to give him a coin before entering inside. The boy understood that the role of this man was very great, and he should not be simply bypassed. Therefore, he gave him a whole 5,000 points. The old man was surprised by such generosity, because he was the first to pay attention to him and give so many points. The man thanked him for the generosity and was ready to share useful information that might interest him. And, unexpectedly for himself, the main character wanted to know everything about the 10th floor and the trials that awaited him. This information was very valuable, and he could not refuse when he received such a generous reward. The old man replied that he needed to be careful with the head of the village of the 10th level. And that was all. He did not answer anything else. Although this was not enough, he still thanked him for the answer. He went to the portal that was supposed to transfer him to another level. Now, he found himself in a new place, where it was very smoky and almost nothing could be seen. Now he had to choose the difficulty level, and without thinking, he chose the 10th level. He found himself in the background of the settlement and saw it with his own eyes when the fog cleared. The goal of the task was to find the target and deal with it. The girl who lived in the settlement was picking berries. She was hungry, so she didn't even suspect anything and just ate. Eve managed to collect a full basket, and she considered that she was very lucky today. Therefore, she began to eat the berries, enjoying their taste. However, suddenly she felt some danger and realized that they were not ordinary. At that moment, she saw a terrible mutant who was also eating them and was next to her. She was so scared that she started screaming and tried to run away. The girl begged for someone to save her, but she knew that there was no one around and she was alone. Soon, he would catch up with her, and she realized that she would die. At that moment, he began to approach. She had already lost hope that she would be able to break away and save herself. But suddenly, Kim Soo-hyun appeared, who saved her. He grabbed her and started running away from the mutant. Now, he used the transformation to become stronger and be able to break away. Kim Soo-hyun jumped up because it was the only chance to escape from the monster. In addition, he was going to kill him, so he dealt a strong blow. The monster was defeated because he chopped it into pieces. The child in whose arms had never seen anything like this. The boy was shocked and couldn't say a word. Kim Soo-hyun had to make excuses for taking the boy. After all, everyone thought he was trying to kidnap him and started accusing him of it. And he just smiled and tried to explain that without him, the little one would have been dead by now. However, his mother was convinced that he had ulterior motives and was actually trying to trick her. In addition, she wanted him to leave her settlement because she believed that he was a thief, and she simply closed the door in front of him, leaving him alone. The boy couldn't believe that everything had turned out like this, and now everyone considered him a criminal. But he didn't do anything wrong. Why did this happen? He didn't even notice how the little one was watching him all the time. He hid and carefully watched his every step and was afraid to come near. Now Kim Soo-hyun received a new task. He had to save the settlement in which danger was hidden. In addition, the locals were intimidated, and now they treated him very hostilely. This floor was different from the others, because there was a lot of new and interesting things here. However, he thought that this was not all, and in fact, he had to do something else, not just save the village. It was necessary to get information about the task and start moving in the right direction. All the locals were watching him warily. They were hiding from him, however. Kim Soo-hyun knew this because he felt their eyes on him. However, he knew that they were all real. They were ordinary characters who were on this floor. But this time, it seemed to him that they were not part of the program, but something much bigger. Because at this level, they were scared and did not intend to contact him. What was really going to happen? Were people really preparing to attack him? He tried to calm down and did not want to think about it. Kim Soo-hyun knew that he had to meet a person who knew at least something about this place and could tell him. However, he didn't see anyone at all and was upset about it. But suddenly, he heard a voice. Someone came to him. In front of him, he saw the same boy he had saved. He was standing behind a tree and hiding from it. He was holding something in his hands and wanted to give it to him. Kim Soo-hyun couldn't believe it. Was this little guy the one he had been trying to find for so long? But he simply gave him what he was holding and ran away. It was the berries, which almost killed him. The boy hid behind a tree again and trembled with fear. He thanked the man for saving him from the monster. Kim Soo-hyun couldn't say a word. He was shocked but smiled at the boy. He asked him to come out and showed him the bag he always carried with him. The hungry boy thought that there might be food there, so he forgot about his fear. The little boy was happy and started eating the bread that Kim Soo-hyun gave him. He had never eaten anything more delicious in his life. Now the little boy was not afraid and sat next to the main character. Kim Soo-hyun realized that there was no food in the settlement, and all the people were only surviving thanks to the head of the settlement. All the people considered this man their hero, so he was the head of the village. After all, he worked hard to protect the village and the people who lived in it. Kim Soo-hyun replied that he would like to talk to him and intended to help him fight the monsters. After all, sooner or later, the mutants would start attacking and destroying the entire settlement and the people living there. However, it wasn't that simple, because the mutants couldn't just get into the village. And all this was thanks to the headman, who found a way to restrain them and not let them in. Suddenly, other people approached him. In front of him was the headman of this settlement himself, an old man in a long cloak. Seeing him, Kim Soo-hyun couldn't believe that such a seemingly weak man managed to protect so many people. And at that moment, he remembered the words of the guard, who told him to be careful around him. The old man, seeing him and the food, replied that it was a real luxury for them. And before distributing the food, he should have asked permission so as not to cause panic among the hungry people. The chairman hoped that he would stop doing this and no one else would get his food. Kim Soo-hyun did not dare to ask who was in front of him, but everything was clear anyway. The chairman replied that he wanted to meet him and was glad that such an opportunity had arisen. Kim Soo-hyun asked him to stay in the village for a few days and called himself an ordinary passerby. The chairman replied that the locals were very afraid of people like him. Kim Soo-hyun realized that even at this moment, the man remained alert and did not lose his attention. Now he started to scold the boy for taking food from an unknown person without permission. Kim Soo-hyun tried to support the boy and wanted to calm him down. He put his hand on his head and calmed him down and explained that nothing bad would happen to him. The boy, feeling calm, smiled and looked into his eyes. He stood up and explained that he simply shared the food with him because he saw that the boy was hungry. He put his bag on the ground, which began to glow. There was plenty of food there, enough for everyone, and he was ready to share it with him if he was allowed to stay in the village to live. And now, the headman agreed to his conditions and promised to let him stay here. Now, he was ready to talk to him and ordered him to follow him. He decided to let him stay in one of his own houses. Moving through the city, he first saw the locals who were in the square. He saw that they were performing some kind of ritual and who they were worshipping. They were ready to accept blood and forgive sins. It seemed that it was a ritual of sacrifice. He had seen this before and not even once. After all, before the end of the world, people begin to lose their minds and worship different gods. They were just trying to hide behind the face of faith. And they believed that it could really help. They did not accept reality and believed that everything could be fixed. And in the end, they had absolutely nothing left. However, these people were not so hopeless because they did not throw themselves at each other. Now he witnessed a real sacrifice. They were going to kill a person whose soul was considered black and not good. And suddenly the priest cut the rope. The unfortunate victim fell down, where certain death awaited him. He began to scream, but people just watched what was happening. They were really convinced that this would save them, and they would be able to receive forgiveness for their sins. Kim Soo-hyun just left. He was disappointed in the people and realized that this place was just as terrible as all the others. Moreover, they were preparing for a new sacrifice and wanted to repeat the ritual in 3 days. But they believed that now, since they had performed the ritual, they were safe. Moreover, they were thinking about who they could sacrifice next time. The assistant reported that everything was successful. However, they could not find a new victim. They were following the main character, however. He had not done anything wrong yet. The leader was thinking about using him as the next victim for the ritual, and he was convinced that God himself had sent him for this, and they were going to give him a special drink. Meanwhile, Kim Soo-hyun understood that the settlement was becoming more and more dangerous, and the leader was convinced that this was the only way, and only this way could save the people. Because a new monster had appeared under the village, a huge snake that only eats people. It was she who protected the village from the monsters. That's why they were able to hold out for so long, sacrificing people. There was only one thing he could do as the head of the settlement. It was the price of the lives of hundreds of peaceful people. That's why he had no regrets and was ready to kill the boy. 4 days later, the sky over the village was covered in black clouds and the weather deteriorated sharply. A new ritual was being prepared, and candidates for a new victim had already appeared. They found the main character and gave him a drink of an incomprehensible substance, from which he lost consciousness. They laid him on the ground and were ready to do it. The monks lit a fire and asked for forgiveness for what they had done to him, and nevertheless they cut the rope. They believed that they were doing all this only for the sake of saving the village. The rope broke, and the boy began to fall deep into the dark dungeon, and they silently watched as he began to fall to the bottom of the dark abyss, where a large beast was waiting for him. The snake was huge and hungry. It was waiting until it was fed. Everything was over, and the leader began to return. A day had passed since they threw him down. Therefore, most likely he was already dead and the snake ate him. He wanted to convince them that the monster was in the north, in the same direction the monsters had come from last time. But when he saw what happened, he simply couldn't believe his eyes. Kim Soo-hyun was in front of him, safe and sound. In addition, he was able to defeat the snake and simply cut off its head. The man began to tremble because he didn't understand what all this could mean. He didn't believe that someone was capable of doing such a thing because no one had ever managed to fight him before. However, Kim Soo-hyun looked at him silently. For him, this was a normal thing, and in his life, he had killed thousands of such mutants. The headman couldn't believe it and understand that the main character was actually able to kill him. But he started to get angry with him for daring to do this. After all, it was the snake that was the last hope of the settlement to escape and survive. And now that he was dead, they had no chance of surviving. However, Kim Soo-hyun believed that the leader could only do this for his own benefit. After all, he knew something about the monster, and that weaker mutants would not dare to come to the territory while it was here. And he also knew that a person who feeds a snake could never become its prey. The headman understood that his biggest secret had been revealed. But this was just an assumption, however. Kim Soo-hyun was sure that he was right and not mistaken. So the man was just pretending to be a hero when he said he was just trying to feed her and keep the mutants at bay. But now his hypocrisy had come to an end, because the monster was dead. None of the people could believe what had happened. But Kim Soo-hyun brought the monster's head and showed everyone that it was dead. Now they began to understand that all the sacrifices were in vain. But at this time, they found themselves defenseless, because now other mutants could start attacking them. Now they didn't know what to do, but Kim Soo-hyun promised to help them. The people were shocked when they heard that he was ready to fight for them. But first, he wanted to show them something. These were snake eggs that he stole from her nest. The people were scared again, but he tried to explain everything. People could raise snakes for themselves, feed them and become invulnerable to them. So they would have to look for something else, namely, to feed on mutants. And he assured them that they should no longer sacrifice people. After all, they could start feeding them monsters. But he was going to leave the settlement soon, so he promised to teach them everything and show them how to do it. However, the people did not believe that they would succeed, because all they knew how to do was to cultivate the land. Kim Soo-hyun did not understand why they refused to defend themselves, because this was their village. After all, no one will protect them except themselves. But if they didn't want to fight, then why don't they just give up and give up their lives and their land? And let them continue to kill each other and sacrifice people. But he wasn't going to teach and fight for them until the end of his days. That was how one could become a true hero. And the leader they had was weak and incapable of anything. Now, after hearing his words, the people began to doubt whether their leader's words were true. Kim Soo-hyun didn't have the strength to explain anything more to them. But suddenly they agreed and wanted to fight. He didn't expect this at all, when suddenly, he saw the same boy in front of him. He recognized him immediately, because he was just as afraid of him as before, and hid behind the body of his mother, who called him a criminal. But now he tried to smile and seemed happy. Suddenly, the boy replied that he also wanted to help and was ready to learn from him. Kim Soo-hyun could not believe that a child could want to fight for his home. He praised him for such words and smiled back. Kim Soo-hyun convinced the people that only by joining forces could they win. The hero turned to the people and gave them an example of a boy who was braver than all men. One by one, the people began to agree. They wanted to try to fight, because they were tired of being afraid and living in fear. And in the end, the whole crowd agreed to do it. The same servant appeared before him who did not believe that anything could be changed. After all the people who lived in the village were cowards and could not even protect themselves. But as long as the main character stays with them, they will change and fight. Suddenly, he saw the system and realized that this was the right path. After all, for the completed task, he received progress and realized that it was the residents who were the ones he should protect. Now he thought about where to start. Meanwhile, the leader of the settlement was nowhere to be found. He had his own secrets and had another dungeon that no one knew about. That night, he began to descend there. In his dungeon, there was a giant bird that slept all the time. But now, it was time to wake it up, and the man did it. He was satisfied because he understood that with this monster, he had a chance to become invincible. Meanwhile, the battle with the first monsters that came to the settlement began. They trained to hunt and get food and meat for themselves. In addition, they had to feed the snakes and stock up on food that would soon hatch. And while they were doing this, the main character tried to fight the monsters that attacked them. The men looked at him with delight, and they could not believe that he was so young and so strong. He fought and killed them one by one, and this time he also cut him in half. The men did not interfere because they were not confident in their abilities and were even afraid. The sun would soon set, so they were going to return to the settlement, and he promised to return after killing the other mutants who had already started attacking him. Meanwhile, he saw that his test was almost over. After all, the test was 90% completed. However, he wanted to fight until he completely completed the test 100%. Suddenly, he felt that the ground under his feet began to tremble, and he felt that something terrible and very large was approaching him. Now he realized that a real test would await him. Suddenly, the ground split right in front of him. A giant bird of prey flew into the air from the dungeon. This was the only mutant who was able to attack the snake. The bird of divine blue flame. The main character understood that the leader of the settlement was involved in all this. At this time, a crazy man appeared on the surface. He went crazy and started laughing. He was pleased with his work of art and the monster he had created. After all, he believed that with something like this, the inhabitants of the settlement would again accept him as a hero and begin to respect him. He shouted and waved his hands, therefore attracting his attention. But suddenly the bird began to flap its wings menacingly and flew in his direction. She struck and incinerated the man, and apart from the ashes, nothing remained of him. The main character managed to jump to the side and remained unharmed. However, he had never seen such a powerful force before, and suddenly he saw that the bird began to fly in the direction of the settlement. Therefore, people's lives were in danger, and he began to catch up with it. After all, he could not allow people to die and his mission to be failed. In order to rise into the air, he used the jumping technique. This allowed him to get closer to it. He tried to strike. However, he did not succeed. The monster was too fast. He did not manage to reach it because the beast began to rise higher. But suddenly, unexpectedly for himself, he began to turn around. And now, he was going to attack and kill him. The bird came closer and struck him painfully with its own paws. The blow was so strong that blood came out of his nose and mouth. Is this really the end? But he can't give up so easily. However, he had to keep fighting. He had a rope that he was going to use, and he tried his best to survive. The men were still watching him fight the monster, but they just left because they couldn't help him in any way. However, they thought it was just because of his young age, and they thought that if they were younger, they would also fight on his level. Suddenly, the main character stopped. He pushed away from the house, and the men, when they saw it, could not believe their eyes. The bird flew right above them and moved in the direction of the settlement, and it was ready to kill all the people in its path. The men were scared and could not believe that this was the end and the main character could not win. They started screaming, but this could not stop the beast. However, suddenly, the main character appeared and began the attack. He threw his sword and was able to tie its beak right before the moment of the attack, which saved the men's lives. He could not reach it, so he decided to try to lower it. So he grabbed the rope and started pulling it down with all his might. And now that everything was ready, he was finally able to get closer. And he wanted to kill it in order to take away its power. To do this, he used the power of transformation to take away all the life force of this creature. And he started pulling with all the strength he had. The bird started falling and screaming in pain. Meanwhile, his mother was sitting at home. The teacher started asking where her son had gone and why he stopped attending classes. But she didn't worry about him. But on the contrary, she thought that he had become more mature. Meanwhile, he tried to hold back the energy that was tearing him apart from the inside. Therefore, the bird was incredibly powerful and very strong. The bird was very strong, and he couldn't immediately get all the skills that it had. Therefore, there was a certain limit. What his body could withstand. But suddenly, the rope began to burn his body. He no longer had the strength to fight, so he let go of it. The guy understood that he was starting to fall, but he tried to hold on. He grabbed his sword and, gathering his strength, decided to continue fighting at any cost. The energy was so powerful that he began to scream in pain. His eyes glowed with bright light. He felt incredible warmth and understood that the same thing could happen to him as to the old leader, who simply burned and turned into ashes. But he could not die, because he still had not passed the test 100%. Suddenly, he remembered the necklace that was around his neck. At that time, he considered it unnecessary, but now he realized that it could be useful to him. The guy began to fall, but he tried to concentrate and understand how the necklace could be used. Suddenly, thanks to the potion, he began to recover. All the injuries on his body had disappeared and healed, so he was going to attack. And right now, it was the perfect moment to start attacking. He dealt a strong and powerful blow. The bird, along with him, fell to the ground. The dead beast lay in the city square and no one was hurt. The main character, who was lying next to him, breathed a sigh of relief. He wanted to sleep, so he closed his eyes to rest. When he opened his eyes, he saw in front of him the same boy who was looking at him in fear. Kim Soo-hyun also opened his eyes and also started screaming because he was scared. He couldn't understand what had happened and didn't remember anything. There were many other people in front of him who were glad that he had come to his senses and remained alive. He wanted to get up, but they forced him to stay where he was and rest. The people used the dead bird's body, and now they had a lot of food to feed the snakes. Moreover, they couldn't believe that he managed to survive because they had seen him burn in the fire with their own eyes. Therefore, they, without a doubt, considered him a hero. Suddenly, the little one rushed over and hugged Kim Soo-hyun. He didn't let go of him and was grateful for what he had done for their village. Now, his ordeal was over, and he had received many rewards and achievements. Now, he had nothing to worry about anymore, and he could finally relax. In addition, he realized that he had taken first place again and received the highest rank. More and more people gathered around him. They were all grateful to him for saving them and promised not to forget it. Kim Soo-hyun was silent and didn't know what to do next. But he didn't need to stay anymore. So after a while, he just decided to leave this place. But the people didn't want to let him go. The child didn't want him to just leave. After all, she wanted to say goodbye to him and talk to him. Kim Soo-hyun tried to explain that he had to go to save other people who also needed help. But when he saw his kind eyes, he was confused and didn't know how to behave. The boy gave him back his bag. He promised that he would never forget him and would always remember his kindness. And he gave him the fruits that he had picked in the forest as a gift. And he also got to know him and called his name. And after saying goodbye again, he wished him luck and smiled. Kim Soo-hyun, having said goodbye, was about to leave. Meanwhile, a car was moving on the road. Inside was Choi Hak-jun, who looked very tense. The man noticed his excitement and tried to find out what had happened. He sat next to him and looked at him the whole time. But Choi Hak-jun didn't admit that he was really scared. It became clear that now, the guy had reached the 10th floor and his rank could be very high. He could even try himself in something new and rightfully, his fashion was considered the strongest among the newcomers. The man looked at him and smiled. But that wasn't all. He started talking about the main character, who now also had a very high rank. After all, he knew that right now the main character had also cleared the 10th floor, so soon he would also be evaluated. He said this so that the guy would pay attention, because he had a competitor who was not far behind him. And every day he advanced further and became stronger and was really very dangerous. That's why he wanted the guy to talk to him and make him join their guild. Because if the guy joined them, only then would Choi Hak-jun be free. This meant that then, in that case, he would be free and could do whatever he wanted. Meanwhile, the evaluation committee for the test participants began. Choi Hak-jun arrived there, and it was clear how nervous he was. The man promised to help him and do everything possible so that he would become the leader and get the highest score for the test, and warned him that he should speed up after he finished the exam. After all, if he doesn't do this, everyone will suffer and then there will be a lot of trouble. Choi Hak-jun gathered himself and replied that he would do everything possible to attract the attention of the main character. Now he was left alone and began to think about how he could attract him to his side. He walked towards the building and realized that he had made many mistakes. However, he didn't even notice how the main character was behind him. He was afraid of being late, so he came earlier. This was the very place where they were to be evaluated after the test was completed. And now, he had the opportunity to confirm his rank and he couldn't wait for the judges to finally be able to evaluate him. This was the place where everyone who wanted to, after the test was completed, could find out what rank they now had. Also, if you were a newbie, you could get a new rank there depending on the points you scored during the test. And in order to enter the dungeon, newbies had to get an A rank. Everyone sat in the large hall and waited for the results of the calculation. And those who received a rank immediately became awakened. Therefore, there were many representatives from guilds in the building who wanted to recruit new fighters. The main character was informed that soon, the results would be known and he should just wait. Suddenly, he heard a guy start arguing with the staff. After all, he was not happy that he received such a low rank, although he passed the entire test to the very end. Suddenly, he grabbed the man by the clothes and tried to hit him. Unexpectedly, the rules had changed, and now he was not counted like other times. The protagonist realized that the chance of getting an A rank and entering the dungeon was smaller. However, he knew that it was worth staying calm. Choi Hakjun intervened and tried to stop the man from beating the employee. He managed to easily break his arm, and the man ended up on the ground. The protagonist silently watched what was happening. Suddenly, he noticed an artifact on the criminal's hand that increased magical power. It was a very rare item that was very difficult to obtain, and it seemed to be only given to the chosen ones for their achievements. This meant that he was rich and had a lot of money if he could get it for himself. Most likely, he was an ordinary criminal who robbed other people, because an ordinary novice was not able to save up such a huge amount for an artifact. And now, he wouldn't even get a D rank for what he did. The man started screaming because he couldn't accept that Choi Hakjun had ruined everything and exposed him. An employee approached him and was about to kick him out of the building, but he didn't want to go with them and was going to go alone. Choi Hakjun understood that he had to talk to the main character, but he was in a bad mood right now. Suddenly, he heard his voice. The main character himself approached him and wanted to talk. He first saw him on the second floor, and now it seemed this meeting was a surprise for him. Choi Hakjun asked if it was his first time, but the hero only smiled, because he remembered this place from his past and had been here before. He tried to change the subject, so he asked the man if he had been to this place before. After all, he knew that he was now at level 15 and was able to advance much faster than other beginners. Suddenly, he became very serious and said that he had his own motives for advancing so quickly. And at that moment, the main character realized that in front of him was the same thief from the past who destroyed entire guilds. Suddenly, Choi Hakjun heard his name. His results were ready. He promised to come back soon when he learned about the results. Kim Soo-hyun knew that the guild he was working with now, he had destroyed in the past. Then why did he decide to work with them again? He became curious about why he did it and realized that in fact he was up to something. Suddenly it became clear that the guy had received a B rank. Everyone was amazed, because being so young, he was able to obtain such a high rank. However, the main character was next, and now he was the one who would find out his result. Choi Hakjun held his breath and nervously awaited the results. But when he heard the name, he realized that he also knew it from his past. And now he had no doubt that he was the very warrior who had fought monsters alone and died in the past. And he knew that this was not a human, but a real monster. Who could single-handedly destroy an entire army of monsters and demons? The results were announced and he was leaving the building. However, he was dissatisfied, because he felt that he had made a huge mistake and had screwed up badly. After all, before that, he had calmly awaited the result of his own score calculation. He was offered to measure his own mana. At this moment, the guy started to get nervous, because he was afraid that the main character would get a higher rank than he himself had. The guy was going to do it and wanted to measure his own mana. He closed his eyes because he was nervous. This moment was decisive for him. He placed his hand on a special device for measuring his energy. The energy was so strong that he couldn't contain it and it burst to the surface. Other people who witnessed what was happening understood that, most likely, he was not an ordinary novice. However, the main character didn't feel anything at all. He was worried, but he received a C rank and a 29th level of strength. Choi Hakjun was surprised, because he expected him to receive an A rank, or maybe even higher. Now, people understood that he was not the same legendary warrior, but they simply had the same name. But, even regardless of the result, most were convinced that he was the same Kim Soo-hyun, the legendary warrior from the past. However, now, the man began to doubt. He didn't know if the guy in front of him was the one he was looking for. He already thought that he had made a mistake, and had simply confused him with someone else. But why was the result so low then? And wasn't he the same genius? But in reality, Kim Soo-hyun was trying to hold back his result and hoped that people would believe him. He did it on purpose and didn't show the full level he had. He managed to control his mana, because things could have ended much worse. However, he thought it was normal and believed that no one ever found out who he really was. Still, the rewards he received were pretty good. He gained the Divine Flame skill that could burn demons and many other achievements. Now, the items in the shop were really valuable. So, after thinking for a long time, he decided to buy an egg and no one knew what would hatch from it. He bought it because it was the only item that he didn't know how to get. However, he knew that a dragon with incredible power could hatch from the egg. With its power, there was a chance to become a ranker. Suddenly, a boy approached him. He turned to him and didn't expect to see him here, because he thought he had already left. He asked what happened and why his mana level was so strong and bright. However, he wanted to ask. This question had been tormenting him for a long time, and it was obvious how nervous he was about it. But suddenly they were found by the same evil guy who wanted revenge for what happened to him. The main character immediately realized that he was one of those people who would want revenge for not being able to get his rank. Kim Soo-hyun wanted to convince him how strong Choi Hak-jun was. And right now, there was a chance to check it and convince him of this. Suddenly, he saw that something incomprehensible started happening to the criminal. His body started to tremble and it seemed that he was suffocating. However, as it turned out, the bearded man who took control of his strength was to blame for everything. He was smiling because Choi Hak-jun was late and did not arrive on time. He was waiting for him. The protagonist did not understand who this strange man was, but Choi Hak-jun replied that in front of him was the guild leader himself, and he was easily able to put the guy to sleep and took away some of his strength. Kim Soo-hyun had never seen anyone so strong before. The man's name was Young Dong-young, and he did not want to be addressed so formally. He hit the powerless man who was lying on the ground. The protagonist silently watched what was happening, and realized that Choi Hak-jun knew him and maybe even worked for him. Suddenly, the guild leader paid attention to the protagonist, who had been watching him all the time. He thought that he and Choi Hak-jun were friends. Choi Hak-jun replied that they had met by chance, and he intended to invite him to join the guild. But now, he said that he was not confident in his abilities, and that he would even want to work together with them. Therefore, the man left him, and was going to talk to Kim Soo-hyun himself. Kim Soo-hyun stood in front of the man who started to tell him about himself and his guild. However, he noticed that the guy was acting very strangely, and seemed to want to tell him something. Choi Hak-jun simply asked him to be quiet and not admit that they had known each other before. Now he understood everything and just smiled. He saw that the boy breathed a sigh of relief. But now Kim Soo-hyun had to tell him his own name. And after a while, he answered that his name was Kim Soo-hyun. Because of this, the boy got angry, because he understood that he was finished and his plan did not work. Hearing this, Young Dong-young smiled contentedly. With wide eyes, he looked at him, and he could not believe that in front of him was really the same Young Dong-young, about whom he had heard so much. Choi Hak-jun tried to intervene and explain that the protagonist was weak because he himself was the one who raided him. However, the leader didn't want to listen to him anymore. He ordered him to be quiet because he was the one who decided everything here. Now, he wanted the protagonist to show him his achievement card, and he was really convinced that his rank was C. He couldn't believe it because he expected a much better result from him. He gave him his ID back, and it seemed like he just got confused because the one he was looking for had the same name. And he replied that if the protagonist was the one he was looking for, the leader would have invited him to join his guild. He apologized for disturbing him, but invited him to take the test when he was stronger and ready. But suddenly, the main character abruptly refused his offer. He coldly replied that he would never join him and would not follow his orders. Young Dong-young could not believe what he heard and coldly looked him straight in the eyes. He accused the chief of not valuing people's lives, and the proof of this was the guy he killed. Young Dong-young warned that for refusing, he would be punished for the rest of his life. And the guy he killed was a D rank, and he did not have the strength to defend himself. Young Dong-young started laughing because he thought that they thought completely differently. There was a rule that none of the participants in the trial could fight or attack each other. Even if one of them died during the fight, the other would be punished for being the winner. Therefore, this man deserved his punishment, and it was bound to happen to him sooner or later. He considered his guild the strongest and thought that only he was so strong that he could get away with anything. And he was convinced that everyone wanted to join his guild. But even so, he could not convince him because he still did not want to join and work with him. Young Dong-young just sighed and looked at him. They had nothing more to talk about, so they, together with Choi Hak-jun, were going to leave. Choi Hak-jun smiled and said goodbye to him. They passed each other. But Kim Soo-hyun didn't want to say goodbye to him so easily. He handed him a note and did it so that the guild leader wouldn't notice. He offered him his help and wanted him to call him if he needed help. In fact, he knew this man, and that his guild was really very strong. And its head, the leader himself, was incredibly strong and belonged to the A rank. After returning home, he started looking for any information about her on the internet, and found out that before, he was a common criminal. In the past, he fought with everyone and attacked people who were much weaker than him. He was also involved in human trafficking, drugs, and other crimes. And the way he simply killed an innocent person only confirmed everything. The main character was sure that this man was also not simple and was hiding something from him and other people. Therefore, he was convinced that Choi Hak-jun also knew something about him. But for now, he did not know what he needed to do and how to fight against the guild. And why was such a strong guy like Choi Hak-jun now forced to work for him? He wanted to find out and realized that now, he had a lot of work. Suddenly, he saw that it had started to snow in the yard. From his past life, he knew that when the world ended, it would be very peaceful, quiet, and lonely. Now, he realized that it was winter, and there was very little time left until the end of the year. And suddenly, he remembered that he had another reason to go to the tower and start taking the tests again. And it was not because of the rank, he simply needed a certificate that would prove that he was awakened. This certificate was of great importance because with it, he could take part in raids. He did not want to rush, however. He understood that time was very short, because he knew that the end of the world was near, and he needed to be ready for it. But he was afraid that he might not succeed. Even if he passes all the tests, will he be able to save the world from disaster and not die again, like in his past life? Because he was not the only one, there were many people at the level with the same rank as him. This meant a lot of competition. However, he realized that he had another way. Although he didn't want to do this, he could still try to deceive the guild, in order to have a chance of survival and reduce the competition. Meanwhile, the events moved to a local cafe. The girl met with a man, where they discussed the start of the upcoming test. They were looking through the list of participants who wanted to take part in the next stage. Among the participants, there was no one, because in fact, they were all at about the same level. She was angry because she also wanted to take part but did not pass on points. However, she, together with her husband, were the organizers, so in fact they would also be participants at the same location. The man belonged to rank B. However, they needed at least one participant because the team was not complete. Because now the mortality statistics in the dungeons were very high, and it was necessary to find someone much stronger. He wanted the woman to find at least one suitable candidate for him, who would not be afraid and would be ready to take part in the test. Suddenly, a notification came to her phone. It was an application from the main character, who decided to submit it at the last moment. Kim Soo-hyun. This name was very familiar to them, and it seemed that they had heard it before. In order to show the difficulty of the dungeon, they used colors. Purple is the most difficult color, and orange and yellow are the second most difficult. However, this dungeon, which they were going to right now, was completely different from the others. And in the end, the main character was accepted and became one of the participants in the test. All the participants and organizers were already waiting for him because he was the last one to arrive at the venue. However, he was not late because other people had also just arrived at the venue and no one was in a hurry. The man in front of him introduced himself and called himself the leader of their unit. He also introduced him to all the other participants who were there and gave his name. However, many of those present already knew him and had heard this name many times before. However, the leader assured him that they simply had the same names, and in fact, he was only a C rank and a rookie. From the very beginning, he also thought that in front of him was the hero everyone was talking about. Kim Soo-hyun calmed down because he understood that no one really understood anything and did not know that he had deliberately hidden his strength. After all, he thought that it was better for him not to show his level of skill right now. A girl who had always dreamed of seeing the real Kim Soo-hyun approached him, but was disappointed when she realized that he was not the one. She even thought that the hero was incapable of anything and did not consider him useful. However, he did not understand why she behaved so defiantly. After all, she had the same rank and was not stronger than him. She, in fact, considered herself much better than all the other participants. But when everyone was gathered, it was time to go and start the task. They shouldn't have wasted their energy on fighting, because the dungeon was really dangerous and they had to come together. They would only win if they helped each other. Suddenly, another member approached him. Her name was Kim Yi-eun, and she was supposed to be a doctor in their unit. She wanted to calm him down and warned him that there were members among them who liked to brag. And she explained that the girl who attacked him just had a difficult character, but was actually very kind. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to another man standing to the side. It seemed that no one knew him because he didn't talk to anyone and was behaving very strangely. He didn't want to show his face to anyone for personal reasons and didn't tell anyone his name. However, the main character didn't think it was a good idea. People started to approach the dungeon and realized that they would soon have to go inside. But, for starters, there were a few rules that everyone had to know and follow. However, the main character already knew everything. He knew that everyone would die soon. And he remembered that it would even be talked about on the news, and everyone would be shocked that in a dungeon with such a low difficulty level, everyone would die. However, there were 6 people in the group, while only 5 of them died. And this meant that among all the participants, there could be a killer who killed all the other participants. Because he became a member, there were now 7 of them, but that only meant that the killer would simply have one more victim. So now it was his job to protect the group members and find the real killer among the people. But he didn't understand what he had to do to find him. Suddenly, the leader noticed that he was lost in thought and wasn't listening to him at all. He thought the guy was just worried, so he calmed him down. Finally, they were inside and found themselves in an underground cave. The man assured that there wouldn't be that many mutants inside, so there was no need to be nervous. But suddenly one of the Cyclops appeared right behind him. No one could believe that the monsters that were here would be so big and strong. At this very moment, the Cyclops was about to strike. The protagonist did not understand why such strong monsters ended up in a dungeon whose level of difficulty was not so high. There was an explosion, and a lot of dust was formed from the strong impact. And unexpectedly, the level of the dungeon began to change. None of the participants were ready for this, and they did not know that such a thing was even possible. All the participants were lucky to bounce back and be unharmed. Everyone immediately realized that something very strange and incomprehensible was happening in the dungeon. After all, they were in dungeons whose level of difficulty was much higher, and this meant that the level of this place itself could gradually change. It was like a transformation, like a skill that grew over time.